Hello and welcome back to Rage Gaming and Diablo 4. Today we're talking about that dreaded Capstone Dungeon Walling World Tier 4. World Tier 4 provides some pretty insane benefits. Monsters giving 200% increased XP, the increased gold of course, but more important than that, the gear, ancestral items with their way higher stats, skills, and of course eye levels, and the new pool of unique items, providing you with more opportunities to get those insanely powerful benefits. But to unlock this, you must beat the level 70 Capstone Dungeon, which is a genuine challenge, and you have to do it in World Tier 3 in Nightmare mode. Do you have to wait until level 70 to attempt it though? No, absolutely not. And can you solo it? Yes. In fact, I've done it myself as a level 60 Necromancer, despite our painful lack of mitigation as a class as a whole. Today I want to share with you how I did it, including the build, the strats, the items, and all the ways I made it possible. So let's just get started. The Capstone Dungeon we speak of is none other than the Fallen Temple, filled with level 70 enemies and packs of powerhouse elites. Those elites have frost and fire, so bursting shots of fire in diagonals and circles around them, or much worse, sudden cones of blasting ice after a sudden charge, even from an off-screen elite, which is pretty BS. Within that dungeon, you must complete 2 gathering challenges that kindly leave you with a stacking debuff, making it even easier to one-shot you as time goes on, unless you manage that debuff. Then you go on to defeat some anima holding mini bosses before finally facing down the final boss, which in itself is a very fun, mechanically challenging experience. On the bright side, we have infinite revives in that dungeon compared to say a nightmare dungeon, so even if you do take things very slow or even die many times, you can keep going. And further, you can return to town at any time using your town teleport. This gives you as much chance as you need to go back and repair or potentially upgrade gear or maybe even rethink your plan. The only thing is you need to make sure you don't leave your current party or even relog, because that will probably reset the dungeon in full and that would suck. Let's take a look at my gear and my build. Let's start with the build and we'll start with the skill tree. I'm not going to go through the individual levels of everything, but show you my build that I did it with. This is one of the strongest builds in the game for a Necromancer right now, centered of course around the Bone Spear, sacrificing all your minions to make yourself mega powerful with really high crit. I have the Bone Splinters basic with the enhancement, which serves as a essence generation and not much else. We've maxed out Bone Spear and enhanced it of course, and we go for Supernatural Bone Spear because we want to spread as much vulnerability as possible. In this tier we also pick up all of Unliving Energy, as we want as much essence in this build as possible as it drains tons of it, partly because we have 3 out of 3 imperfectly balanced, making all of our core skills deal 15% more damage at 9% more essence cost. Further, we want to spawn as many corpses as possible, so Hued Flesh helps with that, doubling the chance against bosses, vital in that final fight. At the next tier, I actually only have 1 level of Blood Mist, but I've got 4 item contributions there, so it might look like 5 out of 5. This gives us a iframe opportunity, horrible insta-jibs in that dungeon, especially the final boss fight, so having iframes to avoid those completely is actually really nice. We've maxed out Corpse Explosion, wanting to deal as much damage with that as possible, enhancing it, and then going to Played Corpse Explosion, because whenever we have something stunned, this increases the damage of the explosions, and again we're making everything vulnerable. I'm also picking up Bone Prison, which serves for many purposes, creating a wall around the target location, trapping enemies in it, giving us free DPS time or recovery time, but also generating essence, more for the more enemies that we trap in it. That's because we've enhanced it to do so, and we go for a Ghastly Bone Prison because any enemies put in that Bone Prison immediately become vulnerable, which is wonderful. For the passives in this tree, we pick up All Grim Harvest to help us generate more essence, and All Fueled by Death, increasing our damage for 6 seconds after we consume a corpse. We skip the next tree entirely to come down to the next one, where we pick up 1 level of Corpse Tendrils. This is what's pulling enemies in, stunning them, and letting us get some incredible DPS time. We enhance that and go to Blighted Corpse Tendrils, which is what's generating a load of blood orbs, which are really important for our survivability. When it comes to passives in this tree, we're picking up Necrotic Carapace, which gives us some Fortify. For the passives, we'd love to have all 4, but we've got to take what we can even afford to do with all the points. So 3 out of 3 Serration, Compound Fracture 3 out of 3, and 3 out of 3 Evulsion. On the next tree, we're not picking up any ultimates, but we are going for the standalone passive, giving us 18% damage reduction when we are alone without any minions, as this is a full sacrifice build. This is great. And then further, the next 3 ranks, improving the bonuses of our sacrifices. Our last point then is of course Ossified Essence. Our bone skills deal 1% increased damage for each point of essence we have above 50, and that is key to how we play this build, which I will explain. For the Book of the Dead, again, it's all sacrificed. For warriors, we go for defenders to sacrifice to get the 15% non-physical resistance. We need survivability. For the skeletal mages, we go Shadow, increasing our maximum essence. Again, this is a super draining essence build, so anything that improves our essence is vital. Finally, the Golem is still Iron Golem for the 30% times increased critical strike damage, which is obviously insane. Now let's talk Paragon points and what I've gone with the limited amount that I have at level 60. Starting from the bottom, we work our way up and to the right to grab the rare node, and then move up towards the glyph right here, which is Territorial. This increases our damage to close enemies, which is great, but more important than that, it actually gives us 10% damage reduction against any enemies that are close to us. This is a major damage reduction option from a glyph, and that is fantastic for a class that just doesn't really have mitigation. Like, we don't have ice barriers or whatever like the mages. I think this class should have some sort of blood barrier or something, but for now, we need to use anything we can to reduce damage, and this is a great glyph for that. And of course, we're getting extra damage to close enemies anyway, so it doubles up. Without actually upgrading this glyph to level 15 to increase its radius, I can still get all the dexterity needed, which is wonderful. And as you can see, I come up and to the right to get the rare node for the armor for that survivability, and then back around to the left to get knowledge, and work my way up to the gate. This is where we move up to the next board, my first board upgrade, where I got the Bone Graft board. This is for the legendary node. Hitting enemies with bone skills increases your damage by 1% and maximum essence by 3. This lasts 8 seconds and stacks 8 times. Basically, through our auto attack and bone spear, we are generating this, increasing our essence cap and increasing our bone skill damage, and it's times, so multiples rather than adding, so that's a lot of damage potential. Since this is a bone spear build, this is just a no-brainer. This is a massive node for us to get. So work your way over there as soon as possible, picking up the great magic nodes in this, and of course, the rare nodes for further benefits. At that point, I'm working my way up and to the left, which I haven't been able to complete, as you can see, but I am going to pick up the Calcified node, work my way around to the Reinvigorate and the Tenacity node before going over to the actual glyph and working on that from there. But at level 60, this is what I beat it with. Next, we need to talk about equipment, because this is actually really important. First things first, as a crit bone spear build, you should be using a two-handed weapon that has critical strike damage on it, core skill damage on it, and ideally, unlike me, crit chance. You need a two-hand weapon with high crit strike damage and chance because you want to get towards 100%. Naturally, on my weapon, I increased the main aspect possible for this build, that splintering aspect, which as you can see, you can get in the codex, but I've got the highest roll I can find, which is 4.4 on 195% on mine. It makes enemies hit beyond the first vulnerable for that nearly 5 seconds, and the bone shards after that deal nearly 200% increased bonus damage to vulnerable enemies. So through this build, I'm spreading vulnerability like crazy, and I'm dealing massive bonus damage to anything that is vulnerable. For the amulet, I have Ossified Essence. That improves our key passive even further, increasing the critical strike damage of our bone skills by 1% per essence we have above 50. Doubling up with the passive, that means that we want to fight with as much essence as possible, avoiding going under 50 at pretty much any time we can, never overthrowing bone spears before we work on getting our essence back to then throw more, benefiting from the extra damage. For my rings, we have the essence generating options. Again, we have another one that you can get yourself, but again, I've got a rolled ring there and got a higher roll because of it. It just improves our essence regen as we get crits with bone skills. That's pretty much constant. Then I have the Band of Umbral, which is actually an imprinted aspect from the codex, so I'm only getting 1, and that is really bad. This is one of my worst pieces because you really want the max roll of 4 to really make this powerful, but I'm desperate for anything that helps me generate essence, and this does. Then we have the left side armor, starting with the head. Becoming injured while crowd controlled grants you unstoppable. Out of my 5 armor pieces, I think this is my worst skill that I had in this, because I always have the Blood Mist as an iframe anyway, so this just doesn't really work. What I would prefer to have, and I plan to, as you can see, is have this one. Damaging an elite grants you a barrier, absorbing damage for 10 seconds. This will give us nice survivability, and you can literally take this and imprint it on an already legendary option, which is great. For the chest though, we have a great one. When hit while not healthy, a magical bubble will spawn around me for 5 seconds as my top roll, making me completely immune to damage while standing in it. This is free DPS time and lets me stand and fight even in the boss fight, which is clutch. Such a good option to have, and actually gives us as Necromancer a survivability option. For the gloves, we're improving the Corpse Tendrils. We gain nearly 20% increased critical strike chance for 6 seconds when we cast the Corpse Tendrils and pull the enemies in or stun the boss, and we're dealing nearly 60% bonus critical strike damage to enemies damaged by the tendrils. Even if we don't stun anything with it, just using it gives us crit strike chance and crit strike damage, which is obviously amazing. For the waist, we have an armor stacking option. We gain armor for 4 seconds when we deal any form of damage, giving us massive resistance to damage in general, a really clutch aspect to have as a necromancer in general. Finally, for the boots, we have the Blood Mist Enhancer. This makes Blood Mist trigger corpse explosions when we move near them, and that reduces its cooldown slightly. This used to be broken good in the beta. Now it's just meh, but it does give us a way to reduce the really long cooldown of Blood Mist, does give us more iframes in general, and that is a useful thing. As meh as that is, it's about the best option we have. Now, obviously, I've socketed some of my gear, and I could have gone harder and added sockets to these, and I would recommend that you do. I would recommend rubies to increase your maximum life in your armor, and I would recommend skulls in your jewelry to increase your armor. I should really have had crit strike in my weapons, but yeah, there you go. For skills on your armor, I would strongly recommend anything that adds to total armor and reduces close and far enemy damage in general, to just give yourself as much survivability as possible. But I just used whatever I had, since I'm about to replace all of this with ancestral gear anyway. Next, it's time for us to talk about a little bit of alchemy with the elixirs and incense. For this, I was using the Strong Iron Barb Elixir, providing me with 300 armor and thorns to reflect damage onto those that attack me. Mostly, this is actually about the armor, because it's going to greatly reduce the damage we're taking overall, and that really helps. Further, if you really want to go hard, you can also use Incense, which provides an AoE buff for you and your allies. I would go for Redmine Buzz, which provides maximum life. However, I used this on one attempt, died, and then lost the effect, so I'm pretty sure this is only lasting until you die or the 20 minutes. So I would only use this on, say, a real kill attempt where you're very confident it's going to happen. Now let's talk about the details of this dungeon and what you need to know, including the mechanics of the boss fight and my advice to you. We begin by fighting our way for a main chamber in which we'll pick one of 2 doors. Both are named and lead to a nasty debuff upon completion. Ultimately, you have to do both sides and deal with both debuffs, so I guess it doesn't really matter overall, but I will say one debuff is worse than the other. These are curses. You have the Curse of the Weak, which will increase the damage you take from enemies by 1%, stacking over and over every 5 seconds, capping at 50% increased damage. But you can reduce that every time you kill an enemy by 1 stack. So you got to make sure you're killing enemies, even the regular tiny ones, constantly to prevent that from stacking too high. Meanwhile, the Curse of Indolence will increase the duration of any crowd control effects by 1%, also stacking every 5 seconds up to 50%. Killing enemies reduces that effect, so keep killing them. Either way, you get the debuffs when you bring the item back to the pedestal, but I would choose to start with the Indolence debuff because it's not as bad, but you have to do both of them anyway. Moving beyond that section, you'll need to collect the animus from the mini bosses. These are mega scary because of their frost charge, which has one-shot me every single time. They can even do it off screen, it's stupid. Avoid that by moving out of the way of their front-facing direction constantly. This means rotating around them as much as you can, but ultimately, like any mini-boss, CC them and blast them into oblivion before they can do anything. Eventually, though, we will reach the final chamber, the boss room, with a familiar friend from the story, Elias. This is a powered-up version, however, and is, of course, a very intense challenge. He has a bunch of mechanics. Starting with the charged circle shots, he channels these around them and sends them around in a circle from his location. To deal with this, you want to run to max distance, dodging them as they move towards you from off-screen. The more space you have, the easier this is to deal with. They do one shot. Then he has his more consistent channeled direct shots, which he'll do and then send at you. I just rotate around him to prevent him hitting me in full with these, spamming potions as much as possible. Anytime I get hit, I want to make sure I'm back to 100% health. Next is the summoning circles 1 and 2, summoning small enemies and bigger succubuses. Try to avoid standing in any of those circles because they do ridiculous damage, using your dodge to get out of them as soon as possible. Try to clean up any adds as priority because that will create more corpses, which you can pop for essence, damage increases, or potentially blood orbs you can walk through to heal. Having a nice stack of corpses and blood orbs and picking those up and using them throughout the fight wherever possible, that is great. Consistently spam corpse tendrils whenever you can though, because if you can get the stun on Elias, that's pretty much GG, you win. His next mechanic is the arena carve, where he cuts out a quarter of the arena, or all of the arena in waves and sections when you get him low. Try to maintain the distance to Elias at a close to medium range. This allows you to run around him when he begins doing the carve animation, but to be honest with you, you can just blood mist to avoid these every time, and that is pretty much what I save blood mist for consistently. Lastly is the final summoning triangle. You want to avoid standing in any of that or touching the fire. Try to stand on the outside so you don't get stuck in the middle and end up having to walk through fire and kill the big ads pretty quick if you can, again for more healing and corpse options. One of my worst runs was my kill run. I'd avoid all the mechanics, do really well, maintain high essence, be very smart, and then get one shot. My successful attempt, I got hit by so many things and just didn't get one shot for some reason, and was absolutely spamming my bone spear and dumping my essence inefficiently just to get him dead. So it was a pretty lucky run at the end for me. There were so many runs where I was doing the mechanics properly and ended up getting hit once and then just dying. It is a very tough fight, but because you can repeatedly attempt it, and if it comes to it, go back to town, repair your armor, make more potions, upgrade your gear, do whatever you need to. Because when you beat this guy, World Tier 4 unlocks, that's a major XP increase, and now you're getting gear that is so much stronger that it's worth suffering to get through this Capstone Dungeon as soon as you can get away with it. But there you have it. That is how I beat the Capstone Dungeon at level 60 as a Necromancer. I absolutely could have gone harder on upgrading all of my gear properly, creating slots and gemming them all. I would say my average item power level was around 690. We could have gone for higher, but ultimately you want to do this as soon as possible and commit to this as hard as you want. I would always recommend you commit as hard as you can and make this possible for yourself. And further, avoid soloing it entirely. Do it with some friends. It'll be a lot easier. I just wanted to prove that you can do it as a Necromancer. I hope this video has helped you. Good luck beating it yourself. If you guys have any tips from your own experience, drop it in the comments. But for now, I've been Hollow, you've been you. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.